Hi, I'm Bill Arnold. Thank you for listening to this podcast. There are many more podcasts available at myfaithradio.com. Your support makes this possible. Thank you. No reservations needed, and walk-ins are welcome.
Oh, don't you know, it's the Bill Arnold Show. It's Bill.
And a warm welcome to the Bill Arnold Show. So glad we can do this again today. I'm looking forward to it. As always, I have one of my very favorite guests on the show today, and I'm looking forward to having a discussion with him about first century Christians. And would people today would aliens, if they landed on Earth, would they even recognize churches, our churches? We've really evolved quite a bit from the first century churches and how they did church. And I find this conversation already fascinating. And J. Warner Wallace is my guest. You can learn all about him at coldcasechristianity.com and definitely check out his latest book called Case Files, Murder and Meaning. You will love it. So, Jim, so glad to have you back.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. We've been kind of podcasting on this issue, and I've talked about it years ago when we first was trying to think about doing a podcast, which I think we've done it now for 18 years. But now I just think you mature a little bit and you learn a little more about what you're thinking about the nature of church. And I hear so much online. People will write to me about the nature of their church. So I kind of thought it was time for a podcast about that.
Well, I've been a podcast junkie of yours for a while, and that last podcast you did about 3 weeks ago on platforms and volunteering, which is not necessarily service to the church, but it's just volunteering and how you did what you did and do what you do. And I found that it's just so unbelievably inspiring. It's really, you're like mentoring me without knowing it.
Well, there's a problem, right, when you talk about those kinds of things, because there's a lack of humility in saying, well, I'm doing this over here. But I think it just wanted to be real about the struggle when I became a Christian late in life. It didn't really have a context, right, in which to evaluate, like, what do Christians think about this? I just knew I got saved and I wanted to do something because I felt like I'd been ignoring God for my entire life, and I felt so grateful that I wasn't in that position anymore, that I thought, well, how do I respond to that? Like, what is God calling me to do now? And I already had a full-time job. So it wasn't going to be like, I'm going to leave my job. But believe me, Bill, I thought about it. Mm-hmm. I went to seminary and I thought there were a couple opportunities there where I thought, yeah, I might just leave my job. And I'm glad I didn't. I really think that we're called, all of us, I need to ask ourselves, like, what are we willing to do for God in this season when there's nothing in it for us? Like, are we willing to do, and of course there's paid service throughout mm-hmm. all of Scripture. You see this all the time. But Paul says in 1 Corinthians, yeah, but I haven't asked for that because I don't want to hinder the progress of the church or the progress of the gospel. I don't want to hinder the gospel by requiring money for what I'm doing. He was a tent maker. He worked to support himself. And that's the kind of thing that I think all of us have to ask the question. If there was nothing in it for you personally, would you still do it? Would you still be going after it as hard as we're going after it now? I think it's a good question we have to ask ourselves every time we step out and say we're doing something for God. Mm-hmm.
Well, the podcast that I listened to today was amazing, as always. I love the way you think. I love the way you process. And you've got something in here that is so big, so profound. I'm not going to say it out loud. I'm going to let you do it. But let's talk about this whole idea of first century churches and how different our churches are today. So I'm going to leave it there. Oh, did I lose you? I must have lost him.
Apparently we have.
That's good. Jim usually responds so quickly that I thought, well, I'm going to give him a chance to pause and think, but he really did go away.
Yeah, let's see if I can get him back. In the meantime, you could try and answer that question yourself if you want.
I know how to answer it.
Goodness.
Is church a place where you go, or is it a people that you are? And I thought, boy, because you can You could just attend church, and church becomes a place where you go, but church should really become a group of people who you are. And that should be the response that we have, because we just don't want to go to church and check the box and go home and hear a good sermon and sing some worship songs and talk to some people on the way out. We want to be a body of believers that goes out into the world and puts their faith into action and makes a difference. And our first century churches are so different from our churches today because they were really designed for the edification of one another, because you'd gather in homes and you would break bread. There would be multiple people that would be teaching, but there would be mostly horizontal interaction. You would be encouraging one another, building one another up, listening to one another, and it would not be something that would be over in an hour. There was some vertical worship to God, of course, but the primary method or the primary purpose of these first century churches was to the edification of the body. All right, Jim, I think you're back.
Doesn't it make for great radio? You have to drop like
it does.
that.
I asked you a question, and then I thought that's a longer pause than what Jim normally takes.
Yeah, well, I was just thinking deeply. This whole time I was thinking, actually, I was really just, I pushed pause for a second so I could think of the answer for this. But the reality of it is what you're talking about in the first century church, right? This idea, like you just mentioned, this idea that, hey, what is almost everything that's driving you, if you're listening to us right now, I'll bet you that almost everything that you're thinking about in your church experience that you're asking, and I guess we're so prideful that we often do this even when it's not warranted, but if there's something you're thinking, I'm not quite sure about this, it's probably due to the fact that we have shifted. It's like that thought experiment I offered in the podcast. And this was me. If you're an alien flying into planet Earth, and you're coming in from the edge of the solar system, and you're almost there, and your adjutant says, "Well, when we land, you're going to meet some people called Christians. Would you like to know what they believe?" And you said, "Okay, yeah, sure. Well, what do I need to do?" "Well, read this book. Read the New Testament. It'll tell you all about what they believe, who their Savior is, and you can even see what they're like in their life, because there's a thing called the Book of Acts, which will record what they are like in the world." And so you read through all of this. Do you think you'd be shocked do you think you'd see anything when you landed on Earth that in any way resembled anything you'd learned in the Book of Acts about the church and how the church behaves?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think you would. Now, it's not to say that there is no room for growth and evolution of just things that happen as this context. If you're living in 2026 Los Angeles County, that's going to be a lot different than you would be in that area around Jerusalem in the first century. I get that. But the idea that we would move from a situation in which we could know each other as a family that intimately to a situation where we don't know anyone in the church. I got saved in a church that had 18,000 members at the time. And I mean, I could have gone or left or come or been there or not been there, and nobody would have noticed. You had to make a real effort to even be known.
Mm-hmm.
And then we, of course, had every kind of sub-ministry you could think of. We had a volleyball ministry. You name it, we had it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But the reality of it is, when Peter writes to the church in 1 Peter, you'll notice there's a section in which he's writing to children. And the word that's used for children is, there's not just like the adult children of parents, but no, children. And he's writing to them as though he expects them to be in the room with their parents when this letter was going to be read. In other words, it was one family in the context of 20 or 30 people, maybe tops. And of course, these grew over time. But the earliest churches we have were small. So when we say that the church in Ephesus, we're not talking about a church of 1,000 people that meets in this big, gymnasium at the local high school. We're talking about, 100 churches of 10 that meet all over the city, and together collectively they are the church at Ephesus. Or in the region of Ephesus. So the whole point is that I think we have to kind of ask ourselves the question: Have we shaped this into something that now dictates? That's the shape we have is the tail that wags the dog. And a lot of that, if we're honest, is the fact that we pay a mortgage. I'm here in Southern California. You cannot plant a church in Southern California unless you have a pretty substantial amount of funding,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because just the property. I remember this was probably now 15 years ago. We were renting a high school for just one day a week at $5,000 a month. And so you have to raise a certain amount of money just to pay for the facility, and you'll never own it.
Right.
So you'll always be doing that. They're at the whim of whoever's charging you that rent. And so I thought, was there a way to get back to a form of church where I could take that money component out so that that wouldn't be the dictator of everything we do?
So, do you think, Jim, that the model that we have today is turning us into passive spectators versus first
I wish I
century
could remember
churches?
where I first heard this expression, but I've searched and searched in my podcast. I can't remember where I first heard this, and to me, it was foundational. Um, it's the difference between a church that is a place where and a church that is a people who.
Mm-hmm.
Because when we think of church now, we think of it as a place where we go to hear a message, or a place where we meet for Sunday school, or a place where we worship, instead of a people who have been equipped to change the world, basically, and share the gospel with others, to share the hope they have, to share the gospel with those who don't know it yet, to be a light in dark places, and that this is a people who have been equipped for such a purpose. And so this idea of shifting from a place where to a people who,
I love that.
I think is probably at the core
Mm-hmm.
of what I think we kind of have lost. But of course, this is just me coming in as a guy who was 35 when I first got saved and didn't understand why we were. I got to a point, Bill, where I was like, okay, I'm in. This is true. I mean, I've tested it, and these eyewitness accounts are reliable, and I believe that Jesus is exactly who he said he was, and he accomplished and did exactly what the Gospels say he did. But I don't understand why we're doing it this way. Like what? How does that end up over here, where we are really? And let me tell you how I really realized it. I was a youth pastor, and my goal was to get our students to become a people who, rather than have our youth group room be a place where.
Mm-hmm.
So part of it was preparing to regularly go out into the community and serve and influence and be a light in dark places. And I would take my kids on the day we would typically meet for church. I would take them down to Skid Row. And there's a church in Skid Row we would partner with, and we would reach out to people who are living on Skid Row in Los Angeles. And I recognized early on that if you're a church leader, ask yourself this: if you planned a missions trip like that and you put it on like a Wednesday or just a day you don't typically meet, how many people in your congregation are actually going to join and do it? It's like 20%. But if you put it on a day when you would meet anyway, you'll get like 80% because they were
Mm-hmm.
planning on going to church anyway. So I would plan these trips to Skid Row on the day that our church would meet. And at some point, the lead pastor came to me and said, hey, you can't do that anymore because you take so many parents with you because it's kind of a risky trip and you need a lot of adult supervision that those folks don't like double tie the next week. They don't make up for, and we collect here in person. So we're actually like impacting our financial ability to keep the church open because these folks they just don't tithe that week. They don't give a donation that week, and the next week they don't double up.
Mm-hmm.
So now we're 1 week short for all of those adults. And I thought, oh my goodness. So here we are allowing. I mean, we have to pay a mortgage. What he's saying is absolutely true. We had the smallest minimal staff you could possibly have, so it wasn't a staff issue as much as it was a mortgage in a Southern California issue, and that was
Mm-hmm.
because we were trying to house where can 300 people meet. It can't be in your home because we've decided that we're going to move toward these larger churches, and we've moved away from a first century model, and now we have a financial consequence of that. And so this is why when I planted a church, I knew I had to do a church I called Free Church. We're going to plant this. We're going to have no mortgage. We're going to have no bills. We're going to have no paid staff. It's just going to be 100% free. And we're going to want people to be delirious givers, but that money's not going to go to us. We're going to use that money once a month to go out and serve in the community, and usually partnering with a ministry that was doing work in the community already. And we said, hey, we'll bring you. We had a church of about 50, and that's as big as we could have, because I blew out a room in my house and did it in my house for 6 years. And that's all we could do, was about 30 to 50 people. And if you had more than that, you start another group. But you can't be in charge of that. You're one of the many groups in the city that are the church in our city.
So interesting. So this home church you had, were there a bunch of people that were developing their gifts, their ability to speak and teach in the context of this church group?
Yes, and I'll tell you, I made some mistakes early on. So, I'm like everybody else. I got saved in a huge church. I served for about 5 years as a youth pastor in a medium-sized church, and then that church merged. So I knew that the other church that was going to merge with our church, they had a youth pastor already. I was just a volunteer. I was never being paid. So I knew that, hey, that guy needs a job. I don't. I have a job. I'm working as a detective. So I said, tell you what, this is a good time for me to step out. So you already have a youth pastor over there. What if I took all of our seniors and I planted a church for young adults? And so my church was all like college age students. So we took those, and we had about 30 to 50. And that's how we started. Now, when I started, I mistakenly thought, well, I can just pull this into this free church setting and we can change the ethos of this. No. So we were not house churching. We were just doing a church in a house. Very different. In other words, there were still 50 chairs facing forward to a guy who's teaching them. The same. So that had to change. I needed them to step up. Now, it happens organically, but a lot of it has to be intentional. So in other words, rather than prepare a 40-minute message, I knew that this is going to rabbit trail really quick, because someone's going to raise a hand in this setting, like a small group. Say, well, hold on. What about this? Well, I'm not going to be able to jump back into my sermon. I could, I suppose, but instead I want to follow where he or she just led us. So I prepare like 10, 15 minutes, and then who knows where this is going. And then it takes off and it goes in that direction. When it comes time for prayer, that might be 35, 40 minutes, because everyone's got something they want to pray about. We want to pray with them. Someone's sick. We need to lay hands on people. These kinds of things would happen in that setting. Why? Because we have one meeting. It could go 3 hours. Wow. But we have one meeting, and there's no boundaries. It's all, and some people didn't like it. I'll tell you why. We had a lot of the parents of these college students that wanted to join us. And so as these college students start to have babies, our house became very chaotic, and we weren't going to separate. We're a house church. We're going to be in the same room. And it became really, for some people, it was like, no, this is too chaotic for me. No problem. There's lots of churches in the community. I can help you find one. But this is how we're going to do it here. We are a family. We meet in this room. How about take that baby on your lap? Walk around in the back of the room for a while with them, so that everyone's here to help everybody else. And that's kind of the approach we took. But I actually had to call a guy who had more experience in this than I did, to say, how can I move these folks to stop being, now they're seeing this house as a place where.
Oh, interesting.
How do I move them to a people who? And here's what he said: get off the platform, get off the front of the room. You need to get other people involved and equip them to do what you think you're supposed to do. And that's very biblical, right? It says Paul says that some are pastors, some are teachers, some are evangelists, to do what? To prepare the church to do the work of ministry. Not to do the work of ministry, but to prepare the church to do the work of ministry. So we have to stop thinking, well, every church you've probably ever been in, it's a 20-80 proposition, right? Yeah. 20% of the people do the work, and then 80% of the people will stand around and watch. Yeah. Well, this can't be that kind of place. There's no place to hide here. If you're going to be part of this group, they're going to know who you are and what you contribute. It's not a works-based thing, but it's just that, hey, this is what we're called to do, to be a people who. And then you got to start thinking about, well, what are the opportunities I'm providing? And you have to provide opportunities where you're not in that room. Yeah. Hey, Jim. Like the room is there to prepare you to go live life a certain way. That's why I think you have to take the mortgage out, because you have to get people equipped and have no bills to pay. So if they don't contribute a dime that week because we're busy serving someplace, it doesn't impact you.
All right. I love this conversation, but I'm getting this look from Wyatt that says if you don't take a break, there's going to be a problem. Right, Wyatt?
Well, no, hey, don't throw me under the bus all the time. But I mean, we do need to take a break.
All right. So we'll take a break and be right back. J. Warner Wallace is my guest. Go to coldcasechristianity.com to learn more about him and his amazing resources that are all there. Be right back. You might be the kind of person that goes to Paris and still listens to Faith Radio on the app. And I'm thinking of a particular couple from northern Minnesota. Or you might be more like the person that just goes into the next room in your apartment and listens. Well, the good news is using the app is just as easy in both places. Downloading the free app is crazy easy. Just text the word app to 877-933-2484 and then click the link. And if you happen to be in Paris, there is a coffee shop, but you should see the prices of biscotti. They have gone through the roof. I recommend avoiding it. Here's a question. Would first century Christians even recognize what we call church today? That's our discussion with J. Warner Wallace. And Jim, I love the comments you were making prior to the break about developing other people, their talking, teaching, leading skills, because that's how we're equipped to go out and be useful for the kingdom.
Yeah, a lot of that's just trying to figure out, like, what are so much language in Paul's writings in Ephesians and other places. You'll see he's talking about our giftedness, right?
Mm-hmm.
How Christ gifts us with these things that we can then gift our community, gift the church with them. And so I think a lot of it for me as a leader was figuring out, okay, look, not everyone here is going to feel like they want to preach a sermon or lead a group or do, but there's all these other gifts that we have to recognize. Well, what are our gifts? And then how, as a leader, how do I make sure that you're getting a chance to scratch that itch? How do I make sure I put you in a place where you can use the gift that God has given you? Because, by the way, if you use your gifts, it's so satisfying in a selfish way when you feel like, hey, I'm in my sweet spot. This is something I can do, that I think it makes a difference in how well you perform at anything. So, even in terms of your service to the church.
I would agree. And when I think of the edification of the body, building one another up, and other people would show up at these home churches in the first century, and they would know then how to share their faith better, and they would feel more confident. I mean, otherwise, you go to a church, or you talk about it's a place where you go, you might go every Sunday for 20 years, and 20 years later, you still can't articulate your faith or share it with somebody, and you haven't learned anything too practical.
Yeah, I used to say when I had the church in our house, I used to say, we've kind of gotten to a version of this where it's kind of like a restaurant version, right? Where we go and we like things about the restaurant. Is the food good? Is the service good? Is it in a good location? These are sometimes the kinds of ways that people church shop, right? They church shop like, well, it's close to home. I don't like this other thing, but of the 6 things I'm looking for, it's got 5. Rather than, hey, is this a place where I can become, where people are encouraging me to be the best version of me I can be, so that at the end of this, I will stand before a holy God and be the best version. And the church has helped me do that. Not that the church is here to serve you, okay? But it turns out that when you serve Christ, it changes you. It just does. And so if you're in a place where you're being, where you actually are serving, look, how many times have you been in a church that's large and you've heard the pastor say, hey, I really want to encourage you to join one of our small groups. I got this small group program here. And if you're not doing small group, you're really missing the point of this. And he seems like he's hard selling the small group experience. Well, he's doing that for a reason. He's doing that because he knows that is where life exists. It's not in this Sunday meeting. That's where you become a people who, rather than a place where. So I think one of the ways you kind of start to move in this direction is you have to take the emphasis on the facility and remove it. And that's one of the things I learned right away. If I just continue to have these folks meet in my home, they're going to see this as a place where again. So we have to start moving this around. We're in this community, but there's 30 of us here, which means there's probably like 10 to 15 homes that we could actually use to meet. Will they be perfect? No. No, because I actually, when I first started, I blew out the room. I designed it. That was a mistake. I designed it like a church in my house,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it makes the teaching front facing,
Mm-hmm.
where it's not conversational, it's not interactive. It's set up for 50 people to sit silently and listen to a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not the point here, because if you really want to grow, this is about moving from just instruction to discipleship to mentorship. And if you think about what mentorship is, right? So much of this is about influence. Does the church influence the culture? Has Jesus influenced this body of people who call themselves the church? So influence is something I'm interested in, right? Even as a parent. I mean, how many times have you had someone say to you, your kids are out of control? Well, no, they're not out of control. It's just that I've lost influence with them. There's a difference between influence and control.
Mm-hmm.
You want influence. Well, influence is based, it seems to me, on two things that are always paired, right? Relationship and information. Relationship and information. If you want influence, you have to have both. And by the way, it's a lot easier to get the information you don't have than to build the relationship you don't have. So for me as a leader, if I want to influence this group, I need to be in deep relationship with them. And I remember talking to somebody who I respect greatly, who I was part of that church staff, and they told me that, yeah, once I got to about 300 members, I realized that we were at something was about to happen, because now I knew that I wouldn't really have the relationships. I'm thinking 300, I can't do 30, because you want to have the relationship that is text available by way of a text. That's a real relationship,
True.
right? I can call me. You can come to my house. We can have dinner. You can text me. You have my number, right? Well, how many of you have the number of your pastor? Now, maybe a lot of people do, but I'm from an urban area, Los Angeles County. The churches here are quite large. And I think that makes it a little harder to have that level of intimacy. So that you start to lose influence if you have only information. I can preach a sermon, but I have no relationship where I know you by name.
So, Jim, when you start to talk about church as a place where, what happens when people start referring to their church by the name of the senior pastor?
Yeah, this is another issue altogether, right? So you and I have talked about how there's three ways that people go sideways. Either they commit a crime, or they fall into some form of idolatry. It's always the same three drivers. It's sex, money, and power. Sex,
Mm-hmm.
money, and power. And so what we typically do is we say, hey, we want to protect our leadership in our church from those three things that most pastors end up falling for. If you're going to fall, you're going to fall in one of those three areas. And we see this all the time, right? And it's sad to see it. Nobody wants to see it. Okay. So then the question becomes, well, how do I manage that? Well, your deacon board probably is going to say, oh, well, I'm going to protect you. I'm going to make sure that we have a budget for your salary, which is going to be, the average of what's happening in our community. We're not going to pay you so little that you find yourself having to do a side hustle to make this happen. We're going to protect you from the pursuit of money. We're going to pay you sufficiently. And then we'll mentor you to help you live within your means. Great. We're going to make sure you don't fall into sexual lust. We're going to do the Billy Graham rule or the Mike Pence rule, right? You're never going to be in a one-on-one with a woman. Great. But when it comes to the power thing, no. We want you to be famous, because the more famous you are, the bigger this church will grow to be, and we'll have more ability to reach more people. We're thinking about it in terms of exponential, unlimited growth. If we have to, we'll do satellites, whatever it takes. And we don't protect pastors. We'll pay for the podcast. We want you to be famous. Well, famous is that pursuit of power that ends up being a problem for some people, because it turns out if you scratch one of those three itches, you end up scratching the other two. So we have to protect pastors from that third thing, which is the pursuit of power, which is really hard to do under the current model of church, because everyone on every deacon board wants their pastor to be famous enough to reach all kinds of people, because they feel like that's how they're going to reach the lost, through the fame and the influence, the footprint, the platform of that pastor. And that to me is a trap. And so if you want to be able to address those three motives for misbehavior, you have to start to think about, well, how big is big enough? for this congregation, for this home, for this family of God? How big is big enough? And we have to actually start to, no one's asking that question, but we need to.
And when you look at social media and the internet, it has changed the rules completely. I mean, growing up, for me, it's you go to church and you heard one pastor preach, and then on occasion, you'd go to another church to hear another pastor, but those are kind of the access you had to teaching. You might have gotten a cassette tape from another church because a friend said, hey, you got to hear this sermon, but you didn't have access to the teaching that you have today.
No, that's true. And as a matter of fact, there's almost no, and really, didn't COVID just throw gasoline on that fire? I mean, we got to a point where we were so comfortable just listening from afar that, and it's not just that it's absolutely possible for you to become as informed, whether you're present in someone's church or whether you're just listening to a podcast. But here's what you can't become. You can't become part of a family. And we aren't just called. It turns out that we are called into a family. We are saved into a family. And because that's in that family that you actually learn humility and you learn how to be part of a family. And that's part of what God wants for us. But I think it's become too easy. And especially I'm a Christian speaker. So I was constantly gone on Sundays. It put me in this terrible habit of having an excuse not to be part of a local church community because I was never available on Sunday. That was always my excuse.
Yeah.
I'm available like maybe one Sunday a month, and that's the Sunday I feel like I need to decompress. So now I'm going to church. What? One every 2 months?
Yeah.
Come on. I can say, well, I'm in church every single week, just not this church.
Yeah, right.
But that's not the same. You're not part of a family anymore, and there's the biggest problem.
All right. We'll take a break and come back. J. Warner Wallace is my guest. Learn more about him at coldcasechristianity.com. If you have a question or comment about our conversation, I'd love to hear it. The text line is open, 877-933-2484. My guest today is J. Warner Wallace, and we're talking about first century churches. And would people today recognize these churches? If you came from the first century and went into church today, would you recognize it? Or has the model changed that much? And Jim, it certainly seems that in the first century, the times of being together and gathering were really done in more of a horizontal sort of fashion. We were doing everything for the edification of the church, to build one another up, to help meet people and their needs. And it seems now when we go to church, all the focus is vertical. We're just doing praise to God and then focusing on the 25, 35-minute sermon.
Yeah, I know. Of course, we want, like, this is about worship, about worshiping God. And so there's a sense in which a people who are something are also going to have places where they equip themselves to become the people who, right? So it's I don't want to make it sound like it's an either or, but it definitely has shifted, I think. Our experience typically of church is this is why you find so many people who are comfortable as Sunday attendees. Right. They'll turn. And so you'll even look and say, well, how do we know who? It's really hard to measure Christian commitment if not in one of these few ways. Like, how do you measure it? If you see polls, we'll talk about, well, how many people get divorced? Well, who's really a committed Christian? Well, how do I measure that? Well, do you go to church every Sunday? How many Sundays a year do you go to church? So we have a tendency to look at church attendance as a measurement of Christian commitment. But the reality of course, is if it's a church where, and this is, you will know what's a church where if you start to see the kinds of statements that people often make, like complaints about the style of worship or about the kind of teaching. Oh, why do you go to that church? Oh, he's a great teacher. I love his teaching. His sermons are so awesome. Well, it's because you're going to this place where you can learn a certain thing. Well, anymore, like you were saying before the break, why wouldn't you just do that by way of a podcast? You don't even need to show up to church in order to get that. So right. I think for me, the question becomes, well, how do we shift from this place where to people who? And a lot of that is about asking the question, what are we doing to equip our people to achieve what God would like us to achieve in the world? So this is where it goes back to that whole thing I talked about for years, the difference between teaching and training, right? Teaching is simply imparting knowledge to somebody, but training is actually equipping people for an event. Like boxers train, you know, first responders, we train. And why do we train like that? Well, we train because we know we're going to have to, at some point, we're going to be challenged to have to do this thing. And so you train because, hey, tomorrow I might be in that fight. That if
Mm-hmm.
I don't learn how to ground fight here in this room today, I might get hurt tomorrow because I'm probably going to have to do this tomorrow or the next day. So I think part of it as church leaders for me was I had to say, okay, so what if I want my people to really understand the value of justice and the difficulty of poverty, I need to put them in a place where they can actually do something about it, where they can actually contribute something.
Mm-hmm.
And that means that I'm going to have to train them in a certain way because in 2 weeks, we're going over there and we're going to go do this thing that hopefully becomes a pattern in your life where you're not going to be comfortable as a Christian without continuing to serve in some way in these kinds of settings. So it really is about, as a leader at least, it's about shifting from teaching to training.
So, Jim, what is going to lead to spiritual maturity? Is it going to be hearing another sermon or engaging in one another activities?
Well, so you can imagine there's two ways I could let's go back to my analogy with law enforcement. Let's say I wanted to teach you how to be an excellent pursuit driver, because often you're going to get involved in pursuits and you don't want to be running people over when you do that. So,
Right.
okay, how am I going to do that? Well, I could, and we do this when we have a training day. We have to train like once a year in pursuit course driving. We will spend the first hour in a classroom on a whiteboard, and we will have a diagram of how do you hit the apex of a turn, like what kind of braking do you do coming into the turn, what point do you hit the turn, and then when do you accelerate out of the turn. Like we will talk about it on a whiteboard. But if I stop there, well, I'm not really doing you much. I mean, you have some head knowledge,
Mm-hmm.
but now I got to get you out on the course. And every time you make a mistake, my instructor is going to be sitting right next to me in the passenger seat. No. Here's what you did wrong there. In other words, he's going to do the pursuit with me. I'm chasing a guy who's also a trainee who's training in the car in front of me. And so he's going to be there with me to go through the pursuit course with me and correct in real time, contribute knowledge in real time to what I'm doing. So here's the biggest challenge we have at church is that we have a tendency to say, well, you should evangelize more. Let me teach you about evangelism with you and do evangelism with you if I really wanted to get you to a place where you're so comfortable, you know how to share the gospel.
Mm-hmm.
And that means I cannot stay on the whiteboard. I've got to get out on the course.
Yeah. Hey, Jim, let me interrupt you just for a minute because we're having some problems with your mic and you're really sounding garbled. So I'm going to take a break, and then when we come back, maybe we'll have a better connection. J. Warner Wallace is my guest, and you can go to Cold Case Christianity to learn more about him. We'll be right back. Hi, podcast listener. You know, I'm Bill Arnold, and my theme song says, "What's for dinner?" And like when I'm grilling, I'm paying really close attention. And I know that ideal second to get the food off the grill. Like all good and ideal timings in life, right now would be an ideal time to be a cheerful giver to Faith Radio. Give now to support this podcast so that more people in more places might come to saving faith in Jesus and grow in their relationship and become a fully devoted follower. Click the link in the show notes or give now at myfaithradio.com. I'm back with J. Warner Wallace, probably with a much better connection. We're talking today about first century churches and possibly how churches today have drifted considerably from that model of how they once gathered. And it will have you questioning or thinking about what you do at your Sunday services, the size of your church and the programs. We are not in the least bit bashing church at all. We're big fans of it. But we're just looking at the difference between first century churches and today. And Jim, right before we went to break, I think I sort of cut you off because your mic went bad, but can you remember what you were saying?
Yeah, we're just talking about that difference between training
Yes,
and
indeed.
teaching, and how, part of it is we have to get in the room. We have to get in the process. You can't teach pursuit training from a whiteboard, although you might start there. Eventually, you have to get in the car with the guy and drive in the pursuit, and in real time make those adjustments, right? Make those suggestions, do life with people.
Hmm.
And that's really hard to do. If I was going to teach you about evangelism in the church, I could show you what this looks like, but really I need to get in the field with you and do a bunch of this with you. And it's really hard if I've got a church of 500. Now, what you said before just a second ago is so important, because people will say, "What are you bashing here? What do you?" No, no. Actually, I love every version of church. If you're in a version that's a mega church, God bless you. If you're
Amen.
in a medium-sized
Yep.
church, or if you're in a house church, I don't think that one excludes the other. I think there are lessons we can learn from all three. But here's the biggest thing. If you're in a church, I don't care how big it is, and it's just become a place where, that's the way you can measure it. Or a people. Now you can argue about whether I can only become a people who, if I take this shape, that's an argument you can have. And you should have that argument. You should be thinking about that. But the bigger issue is, are we called to be a place where, or a people who? It's as simple as that. And I think scripture is pretty clear that we are called to be a people who. Then ask yourself, well, is the setting I'm in right now conducive to doing that, or is it really designed to accomplish something else? Like, what is this? Is this a place where we are becoming a people who? And by the way, I think a lot of that is could be self-corrected within the context of where you already are. You don't have to leave. It's about saying, hey, my responsibility is on me first. I can say I want to be a people who, but if I'm just attending church on Sunday and I'm not even involved in my church in any other way, well, now you are treating the church like it's a place where you get served
Hmm.
rather than where you become a certain kind of person who serves others. So it is, rather than put that burden on a church leader, you could actually self-correct that as a member of that church. There are things you can do that'll change all of that without having to really change much about the structure of your church. It's just about considering which of those two you are.
Hmm. So, do you think the design or model of the church today is again focusing more on evangelism than for the edification of the body, which Paul talked about in 1 Corinthians 14, that was the purpose of the gathering, to have the assembly gather for the strengthening of believers?
Well, think about it. Does Jesus call us to, is the Great Commission about making converts or making disciples? I
Disciples.
mean, we're called to make disciples.
Disciples, yes.
That's that. Now, you have to go through conversion to get to disciple. Yes. So any effort to disciple is also going to involve an effort to evangelize, because you can't get from no belief to disciple without going through that window. So there's no doubt that one involves the other, but the end goal is not conversion. The end goal is to help people to become the version of that they're supposed to become, that they're called to become before a whole. There's a reason why the Christian church, the Christian worldview, is responsible for more universities than any other world group combined. As a matter of fact, Christians have opened and closed more universities in the course of history, the modern university as you and I know it, than every other group has opened combined. We've closed more. Why do we lead the way in upper higher education? Why has it always been that way? Because it turns out when Jesus comes and says, go make disciples, that means you're going to have to teach them something. He is inaugurating a
Right.
teaching worldview that is going to do more. And to become a disciple, I'm just reading in 1 Peter, and the same thing as Paul says in Philippians 2:5 and 2:11, is have this attitude in yourself, which is also in Christ Jesus, right?
Hmm.
Who was a servant, who humbled himself and served others, even to the point of death. Peter does it even more explicit, that we're going to suffer the way that he suffered. But that's because we're expected to be out in the world, a world that is so deeply fallen and rebellious that it doesn't like us when we're there. Like, it feels uncomfortable, because we just, our example alone is calling them to repentance. And that's the kind of people we're supposed to be in the world around us. And this is why we are called to be disciples. You become a disciple when you actually act in the world, and that's what we're called to do.
Hmm. I remember, Jim, the one and only time I went to Zion Missionary Baptist in Watts in L.A., and the Reverend Evie Hill was the pastor. And I think it was the first real black church I had been to. And I sat there, and when the service ended, I looked at my watch and I went, I don't want it to be over. And I had been there 3.5 hours. And I could not believe that it was still going strong as far as the body, because we were doing church together. It was something unlike I had ever experienced.
And I can tell you that's the kind of thing. That is the kind of thing that you see all the time with people who are trying to push this toward people who rather than place where.
Yes.
Right? Because if it's a place where, you're going to be there for 10 minutes and think it's too long.
Right.
When it's a place where you're starting to look at your watch.
Yeah.
This is a place where I expect to have a concise, shorter service. I expect to be in worship for 15 minutes and then a message for 35. I can't tell you, as a speaker, I go to so many churches where I'll ask, well, how long do you want me to speak? And they will say, can you do it in 30? And I'm thinking, wow, well, yeah, I can. I can do this message in 30 minutes. What a shame that, but again, I also feel like, well, is this going to help anyone to actually become the people who, or am I just giving another, tickling their ears with another sermon that sounds like good information? In other words, I'm not here to entertain.
Mm-hmm.
I'm here to equip you to somehow look different on the backside. And so a lot of that is, and by the way, that's hard. Like if I told you, hey, I got an opportunity for you to go to a nice restaurant and have a nice meal, or go work out with me, because that would be good for your health.
Mm-hmm.
If you go work out with me, most people will say, let's just go to lunch, right? Because that's
Right.
Because I enjoy that. And I'm always hungry, so let's go to lunch.
Right.
So it turns out that equipping people to do something and become something is hard work that a lot of people are like, yeah, I'd rather if just attending is that counts for something, I can do that.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd rather not do the heavy lifting. It feels like a gymnasium experience.
That's so true. It's so true. Well,
Hey, by the way, Bill, can you hear, and everyone I'm sure in the audience can hear, as I'm running from room to room?
I can't hear it.
So I have my
fine.
grandchildren, during the week, and so this is my life now, is being Opa, and it's, of course, they're all up from their naps. So this is why my internet connection. We're probably going to move our day to the one day I don't have the kids, so we can do this without.
That's fine. I love that you're willing to do it, even with a house full of grandkids. Anyway, it's really nice.
Yeah, it's awesome. By the way, this is the best for anyone who's listening. You already know if you're a grandparent, but don't work through that season. Try to be available and present for your grandkids, because there's nothing better. Anyway.
Mm-hmm. And tell me, Jim, again, how old your grandkids are?
3 and 1.
Oh, God. That's amazing.
And by the way, just so you all know, it's so much easier to take care of a 3 and a 1-year-old when you're in your 30s. Oh, my goodness. but slap 30 years on this now.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm feeling like, who takes the first nap during the day?
You.
It's me.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
Well, what I love about the first century churches is that I think there was real dialogue that went on. There was conversation that happened. Nobody was slipping through the cracks. If you showed up at a church house, in an assembly at someone's house, you were seen, you were heard, you were noticed, and you developed skills and encouragement.
Yeah, no doubt. And think about how much Scripture is about being known.
Yes.
By God, and how difficult is it to help people understand how they are known by a God of the universe who's got, how many billions of people have been alive in the course of human history. If you don't feel like your own church knows you, if you don't feel like you're all that well, and so that means we have to be in a place where we're so comfortable that I am willing to show you the real me, not the stage version of me that I kind of polish up for 1,000 people, but I mean show you the messy side. And also you have to be so comfortable that you're willing to show me. And it's not a game we're going to play anymore where we're just going to come on Sundays and show each other a version that's not true. I think that's more likely to happen in smaller groups that feel like family units than it is in stage audience type of places where.
Yeah. Jim, thank you for supporting me in my show. You are such a great guest, and not only that, but every time you say yes, I learn a lot, and You've inspired me. I spend time at coldcasechristianity.com. I listen to your podcast. I read your books. You're just a real little mini mentor of mine, so thank you.
Well, Bill, thank you so much for being patient with my bad connection today. I promise to do better next time.
Well, I appreciate it. Have a great time with the grandkids, and we'll talk again next month.
Thanks so much, Bill.
You bet. J. Warner Wallace has been my guest. Learn more about him at coldcasechristianity.com. That's coldcasechristianity.com. So we're going to take a break, and when we come back, I've got theologian Dr. Millard Erickson in the green room. I'm going to go get him, and we're going to have an amazing conversation. Get your questions ready, because you're going to have an opportunity to ask Dr. Erickson whatever you like. We'll be right back. Thanks for listening. Programming like this is made available through your support. Information available at myfaithradio.com.
Coming this Easter, an epic 4-part audio podcast series, The Christ.
My hour has not yet come.
My son, your hour was written before time.
David Oyelowo.
He claims to be a king.
Tom Pelfrey.
My kingdom is not of this world.
Paul Walter Hauser.
He is the light, the true light.
John Rhys Davies and Patricia Heaton. The Christ, wherever you listen to podcasts.
What in the world is happening in the world? And what's happening in your world? And how do you apply the mind of Christ to that? I'm Carmen LaBerge, host of a podcast called The Reconnect with Carmen LaBerge.
The people listening to your show get such a wonderfully informed perspective on the headlines and what God's doing in the world.
If you feel a disconnect, well, let's reconnect the eternal with the everyday so you can walk your faith into the world that God so loves in ways that honor Jesus.
I love Carmen. She's teaching me a lot on how to have everyday conversations.
There are questions that nag us. Who am I? Where do I fit? And what in the world am I in the world to do?
Boldness in asking the hard questions
regarding very difficult, complicated issues.
Let's get into the Word of God and let the Word of God get into us, applying the mind of Christ to the matters of the day.
Bringing in the Christian viewpoint without getting riled up.
The Reconnect with Carmen LaBerge. Listen wherever you get your podcasts and at myfaithpodcast.com.